All right. Looks like we have a couple of people joining, so we'll go ahead and get started. Start with a welcome and introductions. Really glad to see everybody on the call. We're coming to the finish line on this framework, which is exciting to kind of have that move along. And you'll see a little later on, but Lori and I spent some time kind of combing through the framework and trying to tune it up as much as we could. And that'll at least give you something to kind of react to today. So I guess we'll just start with introductions. And if it's okay with you, I'll just call your name out and you can just do a quick introduction. And if you have anything new since the last meeting you want to add, feel free to do that. And please feel free to eat your lunches as we meet, since this is a lunchtime meeting. So Lori, you want to start?
Sure. Lori Fleming, Co-Executive Director for the Community Health Improvement Plan and Behavioral Health Consortium Director.
And I'm John Nowak. I'm the Co-Executive Director of CHIP. Julie?
Good afternoon. I'm Julie Canterbury. I'm the owner of MCS Counseling, and we are in several different contracts in Jefferson County and Kitsap County, and lots of new opportunities coming up, but they're not all solidified yet. So maybe next meeting they'll be solidified. So thank you.
Jean?
I am Jean Scarborough. I'm the clinical director at Jumping Mouse Children's Center, and we do mental health therapy with kids ages 2 to 12. And our recent exciting news, which forgive me if I announced this last meeting, but next year we will have a therapist at the Chimacum Primary School 2 days a week. And we're hoping the following year to have a therapist at the Chimacum Elementary School 2 days a week as well. But we're starting with one school and we're getting a room built out and everything. And we'll also be doing some trauma-informed groups for both paraprofessionals and teachers there that we have been doing, but we will in the fall be doing 2 groups for paraprofessionals at each school, and all paraprofessionals will participate and will be paid to participate, and they will learn about how to support kids who have experienced trauma. So we're excited. That's kind of our new endeavor.
Jean, that is so exciting. That's really one. I mean, it was kind of my hope when we started the Brennan thing. I was on the board when that happened, that it might expand to other schools. So I'm so excited to hear that.
I know, yeah. So we've secured for funding for 2 years, and we have figured that after those 2 years, we'll be pretty well established and be able to fundraise really well. So
awesome. Thanks for sharing that. That's a good way to start the meeting. Case?
Yes, Case Kolf. I'm one of the Public Hospital District board members and also on the Board of Health. And I'm delighted to hear the news that Jean just announced, because I also learned that the provider from public health who has been staffing the teen clinics is also going to be available during the summer in Quilcene, and which is just awesome. And I think Melinda Bowers is her name, and I don't know if she's been invited to be a part of this group or has attended, but that's just another bit of awesome news.
We usually have Susan O'Brien here from School-Based Public Health, but both of them we're so lucky with both of them.
And Dr. Parker?
I am Molly Parker. I'm a Chief Medical Officer of Population Health at Jefferson Healthcare, and I don't have any great news like that, but it's awesome. We'll just shine all the light on MCS and Jumping Mouse, so that's great.
And then Alyssa.
I'm an administrative assistant at Jefferson Healthcare.
Great. So we are going to start out. We usually start out with kind of the immediate update, but we're going to start with the framework today, since kind of getting that to a finish line is kind of important. Lori, can you go back to the slide for just a second?
I'm rushing.
I think the first slide before the framework, we talk a little bit about what we've done on the framework. So Lori and I spent quite a bit of time between our 2 meetings to really tune that framework up as much as possible. We looked at what metrics might be and tried to determine if there were things that have been discussed but haven't really made it into the framework. And as you look through it, what I tried to do is highlight any changes in red so you can see what's new and what's been added. Our focus for today is really to tune that up as much as we can. I'd also like you to think about, is what's in this framework accomplishable in the next 3 to 4 years? That's kind of the time frame that we're going to be looking at for this CHIP plan. So think about whether that's possible, and then ultimately by the end of this meeting today, what we'd like to do is get to 95% on the wording and of the goals and objectives. Also check the metrics, and then if we have time, Lori and I want to start the process of really assigning kind of who are going to own those activities that are in the plan, who is primarily responsible. And I just want to be clear about that responsibility. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are the one that's going to, boots on the ground, complete that, but it's kind of the buck stops with you to make sure that that thing gets accomplished. So we'll hit that hopefully later on in the meeting. So Lori, I think we can go to the framework now. Thank you. So we had kind of a generic goal, and I received some feedback from Kate Dean about some changes to make to that. So this is a new overarching goal. We only have one goal on this framework, and so it now reads, implement a coordinated framework of interventions that result in the elimination of adolescent suicide in Jefferson County by 2023. And it definitely fits those kind of SMART goal aims. So think about it. If you want to tweak anything, let me know, but generally kind of look like we're on the right track. Kind of thumbs up. I'm seeing a few of them there. Yep.
Does that mean January 2023 or the end of 2023?
That's a good point, and I think we should specify that. And I would say the end of 2023.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lori. And then the first objective is to improve resources for adolescent behavioral health. And then the first strategy under that is execute a plan to improve the success of youth connecting and availing themselves of community, family, and school services to support mental health. And then I added a metric, which is 15 additional teams per year will connect with services that improve mental health. And then the data source would be those agencies like MCS, like individual counseling, probably not Jumping Mouse, because I know you're younger kids, but those referrals would report back to this group and let us know if we've accomplished that goal of adding 15. So questions or thoughts about that?
John, I have a question. So if we're improving resources for adolescent behavioral health, but the strategy is to increase connection to the resources, it seems like those are two different things. So I'm wondering if we're improving, if our objective is improving access to available mental health, or are we actually trying to increase available mental health for resources for kids? I just clarify that objective one so that the strategy fits.
Yeah, I think we might want to look at changing, you're right, changing the objective. I wanted to make sure that the metric that we used was an outcome measure rather than a process measure. And to me, making sure that more kids are getting services is one of those outcome measures. So I think we could edit the objective to match more with that. And I think that's a pretty easy thing to do. Does that seem like that would get things aligned?
Are you saying then improve access, and that would include more resources and more use?
Yeah, it may be more on the side of improve utilization of behavioral health resources by adolescents in our community, something like that.
I think that sounds good, or improve access to adolescent behavioral health. And that covers both creating those links, but also being sure there's enough available at the same time.
Okay.
And access utilization, I think, is a more direct term, because that's what you measure, the utilization. Access could just be, you know, we've got 10 clinics. Hey, we've got access. So I think the bottom line is utilization. So I think that would be a good, I mean, that's what we're trying to get them to do.
Yeah.
So that'd fit under strategy 1A, the utilization piece. Is that what you're saying? That makes sense to me.
Yeah, I probably would put that at the objective level. Improve utilization of behavioral health resources by adolescents in our community, something like that, rather than improve resources, improve utilization.
So the objective really is about improving utilization and access more than increasing resources available. Because I don't know from mental health for adolescents, like let's say every adolescent who wanted to in our community reached out for mental health services, would we be able to serve them based on
the availability right
now?
The
availability. I don't really have an answer to that. I can answer that for younger kids.
I think we do have those two different issues. So one is availability, and capacity for adolescents, and then also connecting adolescents to the capacity that we do have.
Yeah.
Do you think it would be good to have objectives for both of those, and then reorganize the strategies and activities underneath that?
Sure. Yeah.
I think that makes sense.
Okay. I think that's easy for us to do. So. That's Lori and I can take that as an action to kind of clean that up and make it follow that model.
Yeah, I hate to take a step back, but I'm still bothered by the goal. Because,
okay, that's okay. No, that's what we're all about. So,
all right. By the end of 2023, we're not going to be able to prove that we've hit our goal, because we're saying, so if the goal is no suicides in a particular year, then you can measure that. But if you say that we're going to implement a coordinated framework that result in eliminating adolescent suicide by a particular date, how long are you going to be measuring to show that you've actually got the goal? Does that mean if in the last month of 2023 you had no suicides, that you met your goal? So
I agree. Can you think of a way to word that might hit that?
You could say that by the year 20, that there will be no adolescent suicides in the year 2024.
Okay. So it could read something like implement a coordinated framework of interventions that result in the elimination of adolescent suicide in Jefferson County for the year 2024 and beyond, or something like that.
Well, I think just saying it. Yeah, go ahead, Molly.
Oh, I think, yeah, I would even consider saying just eliminate adolescent suicide by the year 2024, because if you say our goal is to implement a coordinated framework and eliminate adolescent suicide, we've got two different goals there. And I think the implement a coordinated framework is actually an objective to meet the adolescent suicide goal.
Okay, that makes sense.
So the goal might be that there are no adolescent suicides in the year 2024. That's a very discrete, measurable goal.
Yeah.
It's got a beginning, it's got an end, and you say yes or no.
Okay, so I think the only question I'd have related to that is, would we want to say, something about the years after that? Because I think that's ongoing kind of goal that we want to do?
Well, I think you could say and beyond, but
Okay.
that gives you your first.
Okay.
It
All
could
right.
be every year starting in January 20, every year starting in the year 2024.
Okay. And then I honestly believe that implement a coordinated framework of interventions is actually covered in the objectives and the strategies already. So I think it's okay to just leave that out. Because that's the core of those strategies, is what is the plan to do that. So I don't know what you guys, and as we go through this, think about that, but I'm pretty comfortable just having the goal refer to suicide. I think I'm seeing a couple thumbs up. Thank you.
Yep.
So we're agreed to leave it out. Okay.
Yeah. So the steps under the first strategy are to resource map basically the agencies and organizations that are relevant to this and perform a gap analysis. To develop a method to communicate youth-related efforts and updates between providers. And I'd like to talk a little bit about this one and share a story with you that was related to me about an adolescent who attempted suicide. The parents called, I think it was 7 or 8 therapists before they found someone that would actually, accept their child. And so to me, part of this coordination is, how do we create a system where it's easier for people in our community to know where to go, who has availability for services for therapy for adolescents in our community. And I think, Jumping Mouse, you're kind of a clearinghouse for those younger kids, but I think when it gets into the teen years, it gets a little more murky and difficult. And I don't have any idea what that would look like or how that would work, but I just think, that story just broke my heart, actually, to hear that somebody that's so desperate in that situation, and they're, getting the yellow pages out and calling person after person to try to find somebody. So to me, this objective is really around, how do we provide a more coordinated system that makes it easier for people to navigate and know when and what services are available. Mm-hmm. So if you can think of better wording around that, or do you agree with that vision, and is that seem like a doable and worthwhile goal, I guess, are the questions that I send out to you guys.
Are you talking about it at the goal level or a strategy level?
Well, this is actually at the activity level right now. Okay. It's this activity 1A2.
I think it's important, and I do think, I think I've mentioned this before, and Tanya's not here today, but I think part of the family navigator role that we created had some intention around these pieces. So I just want to make sure that person is involved, because I think we're still very much shaping that role for our community. But one of the ideas of having a family resources navigator was that any family can call and say, this is my situation, I need some support. And she is familiar with what is available in our community. And maybe she could even make some calls to different therapists to take that burden off the family. Now, Tanya's only one person. Maybe in the end, we need more than one Tanya, but that was really part of the intention with it. But I think it's hugely important that those people in that moment find some support while they're seeking more long-term support. And that I, as a provider, could also call Tanya and say, hey, I don't know what's available. We're having to say no to this particular family. Do you have any ideas for me? Because we are kind of a clearinghouse at Jumping Mouse, but at the same time, we're often also saying, I'm sorry, we don't have room. Here's some names you could try. And then they're calling and everybody's full. So we're in the similar situation.
What we could put in this, something around supporting Tanya and the work that she's doing to develop herself and whatever resources, and being available for that. And maybe in a more broad sense, to make sure we tie in and extend the work that the ICG started, or the solutions that the ICG started, so that they're continued and carried on throughout the CHIP. So for instance, we think about funding for Tanya, and if we need more, where do we get that from, that sort of thing.
Well, is Tanya willing to provide that service?
Well, that
For-
is the
for
role
all
we
ages?
created. That is the role we created for her, and it's called the Family Resource Navigator, and that really is the intention of it. Of the original vision was creating a website that had all services, and then yeah, she's a
Yeah. Well, I love your use of the word clearinghouse, because
Yeah.
really that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a point of entry for anyone who's got any questions, issues related to it. And so I would support the use of the word clearinghouse. And
Lori, I'm wondering if you and I could meet with Tanya between now and the next time we get together, and, you know, talk with her about, you know, whether she sees that within the scope of her role. And I don't know if anybody in this group know. I mean, I know that ICG funding, that CARES funding, was kind of limited. Does anybody know if there's been discussion of what happens when that funding runs out, or what the next steps are?
John, I wonder if we're, so as we're talking about this activity, the activity is to develop a method to communicate, and we're kind of jumping into that solution right now. But I think it's really important to develop that method to communicate, but we maybe don't need to figure it out right now, so we can finish the strategy. But I think all of those ideas are really great. And to answer your question, you asked if it was important, and I totally agree it's important. Your story is repeated at least weekly in my office, so it's really essential. Is it doable? I don't know, but it's certainly worth trying. So I think pulling Tanya in, thinking about what's Discovery Behavioral Health's role in this, what is our Jefferson Healthcare Referral Coordinator's role, and our Integrated Behavioral Health role in feeding into that clearinghouse. So I think there are lots of potential ways to make this happen, and to highlight it is really important.
Good. Yeah, and I think one of the discussions is, in terms of the communications, is, you know, this, I think Lori and I both hope that this group continues to meet, you know, after the framework is completed. And I think part of that communication is, you know, a group of people that are involved in, you know, the behavioral health services for youth are continuing to have these conversations and talk about how they, you know, kind of, Lori and I actually talked about this, Molly, about how effective the immunization group was in terms of, you know, getting together and smoothing out the rough edges in those services. And I would hope that this group can kind of fulfill that function moving forward, or at least some form of this group.
Yeah, I really enjoyed being able to collaborate between organizations, you know, on a regular basis. It was really helpful.
So does the objective, though, or the activity, the way it's stated, seem okay to folks? I agree with you, Molly, that it's, you know, we don't have to build the car right now. We just need to have the discussion about what that might look like. So if you think the object or the activity covers that, and the next one is also kind of related. It says, support and design a better process for integration of services across community, family, and school to improve how our kids are served by all. And we actually referred to Tanya in that one as someone who could help do that.
I think this is a really good conversation, because I think being on the side of the resource, how do people get access to us? And we have, you know, at the schools, it's referrals to the schools and the school counselors, and then how, and I think that has become a barrier, or that is a barrier of how do you get access to our school counselors, and how do you get access to our private therapists that are in the community. And so I think I don't want to problem solve. I just think it's important to put that out there. I feel like we do our best to get that information out there, but I think it's still lacking in our ability to communicate with all of Port Townsend of what resources we do have available.
I hate to jump back again to 1A2, but it doesn't say anything about access for families or youth who are in trouble. It only talks about the method of communication between providers and not between people in need and their providers and potential providers. So I think somewhere in there, if we could say, I still like the word clearinghouse, and if that needs to be a separate activity, so be it. But I would see that as important to highlight.
I think we can pretty easily weave that in case to reflect that.
Great.
All right, any other thoughts before we go to the next page? All right. So this is still on that first goal, and we will make all the updates that we have before, but activity 1A4, bring the ESD in to help assess Jefferson specific action plans to reduce suicide to 0. And I think there are some activities that we know of that are going on in that, and this is really about just making sure that, you know, everybody involved in this process is integrated and pulling on the same side of the oar so that we're all rowing in the same direction.
We are in the conversation with all the schools in Port Townsend, Jefferson County, doing mental health first aid for teachers. And so I don't know if this goes in there, but it's new information. We haven't agreed on it. They're waiting till the fall, but that is a piece that I feel is very important in this.
There's actually an activity for that later on, Julie.
Oh, great.
That you'll see. So
yeah, thanks.
And then the next one, develop an approach to gather insights from youth on how best to reach them and execute it. And that kind of relates to the conversation that we had with Finn O'Donnell at an earlier meeting, and not sure how to do that. But again, like Molly said, I don't think we need to solve that right now, just call it out to make sure that we include youth in that process. And I think if this group does continue, I think it's really important that we have some youth representation in this group.
Could we add to that one, not just how to reach them, but what services they need?
Yep.
Or want?
Yeah, I think that's a great addition. Thank you. And then again, the next one is one, I'm not sure we know for sure how to do yet, but it's develop an approach to create safe spaces for kids to gather in Quilcene, PT, and Chimacum and execute. And, what does that look like? Lori and I put some ideas there about how we might do that. But, and I know there is CARES funding developed. The PT conference room is a place in Port Townsend, so that, and I'm not sure how that's been going, but that is kind of a pilot for how we might do that moving forward.
Do we want to add Brennan to that list?
Yeah, probably. I mean, there, adolescents go to Quilcene for school from Brennan, but yeah, I think that's good. That's a good add. So other thoughts about this page? Anything you feel like is missing or we want to add?
For 1A.6, I think that's a great idea. Do you think this committee can create that approach, or do we advocate for creating that approach?
I think
Want to think about doable.
Yeah, I think it's a little of both. I think clearly funding would be kind of step one in that, to be able to find a space or get that service donated or whatever. And I think this type of group has been good at advocating for when funding becomes available. And I mean, everything that I'm hearing, and Julie and Jean, I'm sure you could add to this too. Everything that I'm hearing is that there is a lot more funding that's coming down the pike for mental health finally, and that there may be I'm thinking there are opportunities to do that. So I think that's kind of the way I'm thinking of that, is that we would be an advocate for seeking funding to be able to do that and be able to support that, and that's how we would make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
We'd probably have partners to run it rather than our little team right here running it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Yeah, we are not going to, the six of us do all of these things.
Jean's house will be available to teams to
That's right.
come and hang out.
Bring them on.
I do wonder if
go ahead.
I wonder if some of these things that we're talking about that we know are too big for us, as the team, if it could be covered under a framework that we are supporting ongoing efforts, whether it's by ICG or whomever. And among those ongoing efforts, we know is Tanya's role, this idea of space, and I can't remember the other things that are called out in the ICG plan. So we're supporting, advocating for funding, etc., but we're not implying to the community in any way, shape, or form that we're going to come up with a bowling alley and, have the shoes in by 2023.
Yeah. I think that was something similar. I'm sorry to go backwards, but if you scroll up to the previous page, when I was bringing up Tanya's role, really my intention was, I guess, to develop a method to communicate and support the design. Yeah, so that's fine. I just didn't want us to start trying to build a car that was already partially built. That was the reason I brought that up. But I think that wording is fine. Develop a method to communicate. But I see that as also kind of supporting her role and expanding on it, not just us developing, because there is something there already to work with.
I do think, this hopefully is reassuring to you guys to hear this. I do think that over time, Lori and I have really learned a lot about how to do that and how to be the conveners and the gatherers and, seek out, who can help with this and engage them. And, that I think that is a strong chip roll going forward for these things that are definitely out of the scope of what, like you said, Jean, the six of us could be able to do. It's, we go out and help identify potential funding sources and then people that can do that work. So
great.
All right, ready to move on to next page.
Just make sure I didn't go too far. Okay.
Nope, that's perfect. So this is a new strategy, which is, and Julie, this is the one that you were kind of talking about. It's identify adults who interact with teens frequently in the community and train them on suicide risk identification and prevention. And the metric is that 20 adults would be trained in suicide prevention. We need to put a date on that. But I wanted to get Julie, actually your thoughts about when you think that might happen before we stuck a date on it.
Our goal is, I have a commitment with Cool Scene right now, and they want 30 of their teachers and coaches in that. And so that's just one school. And so I'm also, Brennan is interested, and Chimicum as well. And so it's just the beginning conversation, but it is mental health first aid of a training that is evidence-based.
Do you think we could make that number 50 instead of 20 then, given what you just said?
Yeah,
And do you think that will likely be done in the next calendar year, by?
I would say by the end of December, that would, I would say it's probably double that, but it's not a full commitment. Like, we haven't signed contracts or had the agreement yet, but it's in the talks. So,
Okay.
So I would say 50 would be doable, but I feel it's very realistic.
By December of 2022. Or
2021.
2021. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Good. Awesome. So that I added that as a new activity because of what I'd heard from you, Julie, and it sounds like that seems pretty reasonable. And then, actually, that's actually 1B2. 1B1 is develop a list of people who might need to be trained, and then 1B2 is the actual training.
Hi everybody. It's good to see you all today. Glad to be able to join finally. So just chiming in on that, and forgive me if this is something that's already been discussed, but if that training seems like it's so possible to get that many adults trained just from the schools, and it sounds like there's already a pathway for doing that set up, do you think it would be possible to add in other groups of adults who might be able to join that training or have their own, just since it's something that's already in motion?
Well, I've been part of the mentors group at Port Townsend High School, and I know that Skillmation just sent out or the group there just sent out a request of how many people would be interested and willing to be trained.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm basically seconding your comment, Anne, that it's not just in the schools where I think it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
You see here, I wanted to highlight this as we think about how many we're committing to. We still have to get some funding for these courses. And so if we're talking 50, it's however 50 people fits into this. And if we're talking 100, it's however 100 fits into this, and the various places we would go to get funding for that. So I just want to log in people's minds. It's not just a matter of getting the people to come to the room. There are some genuine costs associated with what needs to be done. And if this group wants to take that on, absolutely. Or if we want to just put in that we want to explore how we could get more folks trained. I think we should put a realistic number though in with what we can do, knowing how much funding we can likely get right now. And how much resource do we have to go chase that funding?
Mm-hmm. So again, forgive me if I'm coming in late on this one, but is there funding already to be able to get the 50 people that we identified, or is that something that we even need to pull in?
That's what we're working on. Denise, actually, when I say we, it's actually Denise Banker, who's usually at this group, who has put together some budget that we're chasing down some different groups that we could possibly get funding. But I don't think that it's in hand yet.
So Lori, are you recommending that we scale that number down from 50?
I'm happy to do 50. I want to be careful about committing above 50. I mean, I think that between us all, we could probably figure out how to get funding for 50 people. And I think if we can get more funding, we should go get it. And if we can raise the profile and get people excited about it, absolutely. But in terms of being able to say to, the hospital board, we said we were going to do 50 and we did 50. I want to make sure we're setting ourselves up for success. Mm-hmm. So we could put something about exploring how to expand it or extend it.
I agree with that. And one of our therapists is trained in it, so the training will not need to be covered in if we did that training. It would just be the cost of the class and our therapist time.
Julie, just a question for you, which is, how scalable are those classes? Is there, if you have 5 people, could you have 15? Or is there kind of a limit to how that works?
There's a limit of 30, and so the ideal number is 20, but to do it in person, our goal is to do it in person, and so 30 is doable with our staff. To do it online, there is ability to do it online, but we would cap it at 20 people because of the capacity, and we would need 2 instructors, so it makes it a little bit more challenging to have it more intimate, but 30 is available to do in person if people are willing to do it in person.
And I guess I was thinking of Anne's question, you know, if we went to a school and only 20 school, you know, people wanted to take the class, could we open it to the community to get it to 30, or what's your thought about that?
I think it's amazing. I think it should be one of the avenues is to the community of doing a training. Yeah, we all, yeah.
Okay.
I have one follow-up question to that, which is just if we were to find initial funding, I'm not suggesting we should go beyond 50 on this, but let's say I met someone and they're like, I want to give you $20,000, Jean, for this specific thing. And I said, here it is, Julie. Would you have the capacity to do more of these trainings? Because that, you know, at Jumping Mouse, we always have people say, well, just give me the money. And I'm like, I know, I wish it were that simple, you know?
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes, we have the capacity. Yeah.
Okay.
I have, I'm working on getting 2 other therapists trained in the youth. And I have 2 therapists trained in the adult that we're doing for aging and long-term care.
Okay, great.
That was
I won't try to build the car, but I have some ideas.
Yeah.
And I think we can stretch this to be outside of schools. You know, I don't think we have to you know, limit ourselves to that if we build the capacity to be able to do it. So I think that's an exciting opportunity. But I kind of agree with Lori. I don't think we want to promise the moon and, you know, not be able to deliver. So
And I just checked my Skillmation email, and it wasn't that kind of training. So I apologize for holding out that hope.
Yeah, it just seems like if we were to open it up, and I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but if we were to open it up, it could also be a dual purpose type of training where it's also an opportunity to create community amongst those adults who are resources to youth, you know, and have them mix with those adults within the school system who are interested in giving this kind of support.
Is there the kind of interest in this that we should reach out to the Skillmation folks, Martha Trolin and Ben Bauermeister?
Case, can you talk a little bit more about how that would work?
Well, I know that that they get together regularly. The mentors, well, it's been by Zoom this year. It's been very difficult, but we used to get together once a month to talk about how it goes, and 20 people would sit around. And then the program is such that that there's a the program is such that every mentor becomes part of is the mentor for a group of 4 to 6 high school students and meets with them once a month during the school year in their career studies program. And so it's something that it's a hugely successful effort that involves probably 50 different adults in this community.
I think it's a great idea, Case.
What I will do is I will send the link to this latest email from that group, and then perhaps somebody could reach out to them and say, hey, would the mentors be interested in considering this kind of training as a group?
Why don't you send it to Laurie and me, Case, and we'll kind of take the ball from there.
Case, would Skillmation have some funding to pay for their mentors to get the training?
We would have to ask. We would have to ask.
I'm sorry, I'm going down that trail.
I don't know. It's run by a number of very dedicated volunteers, and I do not know what sources of funding they use.
Definitely worth exploring.
All right, so at the bottom of this, I put a couple of placeholders. If people knew about other training and Dr. Parker, one of the things, Lori and I both went and looked at that Zero Suicide website, which also has a framework and has some pretty interesting activities. We didn't pull those in because we kind of wanted the group to have that discussion, and I wondered if you wanted to take a look at that and see if there were things that you thought we should pull into this. Anyway, there's a couple placeholders for that, and if people know of other programs, that's why those placeholders are there. The MCS mental health first aid training is something that we know about already. It's evidence-based, and so that's why we put that in. But I think if there's other opportunities, we should look at those as well.
The other opportunity that I'm aware of, and that I think could at least have a big impact within the medical community here, is that UW is offering a free enrollment in their program, which is called All Patients Safe. And many providers have had to do some sort of suicide training as part of their licensure. It's a law change that happened a few years back. But depending on what training they did, it may or may not have been helpful to them in their daily practice. And this is also something that nursing staff and other medical staff can take. And, of course, Jefferson Healthcare is the largest group here of medical providers, but there are other people who are providing healthcare to teens in our community, or providing psychotherapy, and participating in this type of training, I think could be really helpful to everyone in the community, but particularly to our teens, because it really goes over how to create adequate safety plans with teens and work with families, and help create a plan that's gonna actually be helpful for the person who's undergoing a crisis. And it's free right now, so there's not a big funding effort that would have to happen. I don't know, Molly, do you know if there's been much conversation of getting more people enrolled in that, just in the hospital level?
I haven't heard anything, but I haven't been involved in some of the, crisis intervention work in the ER, so it may be going on there.
Yeah, I suggested it to Kent a while back, but I'm not sure if it.
That sounds like a very worthwhile addition to the plan to me. So.
And is that something you could anchor? When we talk about someone who owns that effort, would that be something you could anchor?
What would that look like, do you think?
I don't know, because I don't really know what's involved, but I'm assuming somebody would need to go out and, recruit the people to take the training, make sure that they know what it is, why it's useful.
I think there are folks that could provide some logistical help, but I think it would mainly be kind of being a champion, especially with the providers, to encourage them to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's sort of part of my the advice that I'm already giving out as part of my practice. But already giving out just means the last 3 days that I've been back in the office. So yeah, I would certainly be happy to move forward with being a champion for that. I don't know if I have the capacity to be, widely advertising this, or.
Yeah, I think we could find logistical help for you to do that. So yeah.
I think it would probably need some program coordination, and that probably Anne doesn't have built into her schedule. Is that kind of what you're thinking, Anne?
Yeah, right.
Okay. And just kind of thinking along those lines, sorry if there's an echo, building in, thinking about the zero suicide model versus this model, or how do we want to do this across the hospital? It might be worth us sitting down and figuring out how these pieces might fit together with the work that's being done in the ER too, before we pick one or the other, or a combination of those.
You mean, Molly, before you pick the type of training, or no?
So I'm not just talking about training, but like what kind of supports are we setting up in the hospital right now to deal with the kids showing up in crisis in the ER and in our clinics? there's some active work going on around that. And I haven't been directly involved, but I don't want to duplicate, but I also want to find projects that create solutions to multiple problems instead of multiple solutions to, single problems.
Molly, do you think if we put an activity in to kind of evaluate methodologies for training providers how to react in an adolescent suicide situation, rather than calling out a specific methodology, how would you feel about that, since it doesn't sound like we're really at a point yet where we can call out a specific methodology?
I think listing them as options is great, and then fitting into the wording, having the individual organizations, aka Jefferson Healthcare, figure out what works best for the patient to access us, and the schools figure out what works best for people accessing them. And it may, ideally it would be all similar training, so we were all on the same page. But yeah, I don't think we're ready to commit to one or another.
Okay, I can work on wording that, and then maybe if you guys can, you and Ann can look at that next week and or next time we meet, and let me know if I hit the mark or suggest some other wording for it.
The only thing I want to add in is that this program, there's a time limit on how long it's going to be free to take that particular training. And again, the All Patients Safe is a really high quality training that I think would be worth highlighting for any sort of client facing staff or medical professionals. This wouldn't be appropriate for like our teacher community, for example. But it's only available for free until November of this year.
Okay.
So there is a time constraint there.
All right.
So that is something to think about. Right now, we are in the stage of creating the plan, and then it's going to sort of have to go through an approval process. So this group, while it may meet on its own, it's not meeting through CHIP during that approval process. And I'm wondering if that's going to, if we want to get this word out, if we don't depend on the meetings of this group to, to organize that, because it won't be happening here post-August until we figure out what the next phase is.
And if you and Molly could kind of put your heads together and see if you want to try to move ahead on this before it expires. I think I might be able to provide some resources to you to help the logistical part if you think, we want to kind of do this as a campaign. And I think it's kind of independent of CHIP, but it seems like a worthwhile thing to at least explore. So if you two want to talk and then get back to me and let me know, then I'll see what I can do to help put the other pieces together.
Sounds good.
And I put a link in the chat to the Skillnation website, and I would urge anyone who's looking for adults to train in this particular field to just contact them directly.
Lori, I think there's one more page, and we've got about 5 minutes left, and I'd at least like to look at it because it's a new strategy, and that's that we didn't really have anything in the plan about how to help teens to deal with, what happens when someone comes to them and says, hey, I'm planning a suicide or whatever. And since the data that we got from the the follow-up on the Healthy Youth Survey was that kids don't typically go to adults, it felt to me like this was a pretty important strategy and activity that was missing from our plan. So basically what I put in is kind of a placeholder to say, is there a methodology or a plan out there for how to teach kids to do peer counseling and referral as necessary? So the idea is to research the tools and then create a training plan to implement this in at least 3 of our school districts.
Julie, are any of your therapists trained on the adolescent version of mental health first aid?
Yeah, one of my therapists is. I'm working on another committee with the health department, creating a peer-to-peer program for drug and alcohol and mental health. And we just met last week, and so there is a conversation with that right now with Port Townsend High School to Blue Heron. And so that's just in the conversation. But I think also in the Teen Coalition, they are wanting to do a training for mental health first aid to train youth to be able to have a peer-to-peer training to help in the schools of Chimacum. So those are in the conversations.
Sorry. Given that information, it sounds like there is some energy around keeping this strategies and activities in the plan. Are people pretty much okay with that? See a few thumbs up. Good. Okay. We are just about out of time. We were going to talk a little bit about immediate actions, but I think that, the main one that's going on is this education stuff that Julie has been talking about. And then there's obviously some Benji project work that's going on. Lori, is there anything else you wanted to highlight on this slide?
I just want to highlight with this slide, we're not going to be able to talk about it, but what we have is something that I think we've touched on a little bit earlier in this meeting, and that is that we have a lot of things that are in conversation at this table. I think it would be good if we figured those out before we start talking to the school district and confusing them and ourselves with who is doing what with whom, so that we are, as Dr. Parker says, creating one solution, or we have one solution for multiple problems instead of multiple solutions for one problem. I know that Jenny had started conversations with C.L. Meyer about this crisis connections training, and they may all be very different, but I think in our own minds, we haven't clarified what we're doing, what we want to do with whom. And it makes sense, I think, for this group to clarify it here before we have multiple points of contact, talking with multiple points at the school district, and then we don't get anything done because we're kind of not being mindful of their bandwidth. And so the whole point of CHIP is that we want to be clarified so that we can go to them with something very concise.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we meet again in 3 weeks. Lori and I'll take a whirl at making the changes that were suggested today and send the framework out. I'm feeling like we hit our mark. We're 90% of the way there on it. I'm hoping that between now and the next meeting, you could maybe take a few minutes, look at it, and if you have some wordsmithing or major changes to make, send us that information. At the next meeting, we're going to really look at who has the primary responsibility for those things. And I think also a follow-up on what Lori just talked about. How do we make sure we're kind of speaking with one voice when we go out and talk to the schools, and that we have a solid plan in mind. So any other thoughts or questions? This was a great meeting. I really appreciate, I felt like there was a lot of energy and collaboration. So thanks for that. And I feel like we're getting really close. So thanks for all your energy and effort. And we'll see you in a few weeks.
It was good to see you, Ann.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so happy to be able to join. Thank you.
And I'm so happy that Alyssa is part of this effort. She has helped me survive my job at Jefferson Healthcare for almost 6 years.
Thanks, Case.
All right, you guys, thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
Have a good afternoon. Bye.